Delighted to be joined right now by Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, OBE. He's a former British Army colonel. He's a chemical weapons expert. He's also someone who spent much time out in Syria, actually trying to, well, do the actual, the really important work of helping sick children get out and get a hospital treatment during the early stages of that civil war. Hamish, thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thanks.
I really appreciate it. Well, I wonder if it is going to be a pleasure in terms of what happens to the Syrian people. We've seen all this, excitement, joy on the streets of Syria that President Bashar al-Assad has gone and been deposed. He's fled to Moscow with his British-born wife. Still find it extraordinary that she's still with him, but there we are. Off to spend their billions that they've stolen from the Syrian people. But we also know that what happens next in Syria could be anything. And given the way that most countries have gone since the Arab Spring or since uprisings, it doesn't look very good. We've certainly got the organisation HTS, which is basically, is a jihadi organisation that looks like it's the one that's leading the rebel forces. How worried are you about the threat of what happens in Syria having a fallout for the West and indeed for Britain, in particular the threat of thousands of jihadis being freed from Syrian prisons and returning to the UK?
Well, yeah, of course I am really concerned, but I'm delighted. All my Syrian friends in Syria and around the place are very upbeat, and I think that is important. I think also, I was in Iraq in 2003 when Saddam Hussein regime fell down, and spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, as we discussed. So, I have witnessed when it goes really badly wrong. And, my piece in the Telegraph yesterday was really saying we need to make sure we don't repeat those mistakes. And that's absolutely key, which is why it's got to be an Arab-led, Syrian-led. Now, all the other issues, just one thing before we go on, what really, really annoys me with all of this is we could have stopped this in September 2013. When Assad dropped sarin and killed 1,500 civilians in Ghouta, we had a vote in Parliament. I was there. I'd just come out of Syria, and I was telling everybody that Assad was about to fall. Unfortunately, Ed Miliband and some of the others voted against it. And had we struck Assad's chemical weapons facilities in September 2013, I think it would have all been over. But anyway, that's...
Yeah. And again, this was that famous Obama red line. If they used chemical weapons, that would be the red line in terms of the Americans getting involved. Because we know Western powers were basically saying, after Iraq and Afghanistan, we're not going to get involved. And of course, we've seen absolute devastation. I mean, more people dying in Syria than dying in Iraq. 500,000 people as a result of us not getting involved. Whether we would have made it any better, still a big question mark about that. But with Assad gone, look, a brutal, evil dictator. Although apparently John Simpson at the BBC was quoting his tweet the other day, saying that he was a rather meek man, and he was kind of told to do what he did. I mean, an extraordinary defence of this awful, heinous, evil man. But is what's on offer now any better? This jihadi group that involve links with Al-Qaeda. We've got the massive sectarian differences. Is the country going to hold together? Is this a country, for instance, where we can say to those who've claimed refugee status here because they were fleeing Assad's regime, yep, off you go, time to go back to Syria because it's now safe?
Well, I'm a bit more upbeat. Now, Syria, basically, the majority of civilians are moderate and secular. Now, I quite agree. HTS grew out of... I saw Al-Qaeda and ISIS back in 2012, 2013, and thank God managed to avoid them. I was last in Syria in 2020, 4 years ago. But I saw HTS then, and they had changed... they were trying to show themselves as moderates. And, certainly they weren't trying to kill me then as Al-Qaeda and ISIS were back in 2013. So we will see if they're as good as their word. I think stuff coming out at the moment is positive. The concerns about all the terrorists in camps in eastern Syria is a huge concern. I think the Americans and the Israelis are playing a smart game at the moment by absolutely hammering these people to make sure that they can't influence now.
That's the airstrikes that we've been seeing on weapons supplies and air bases in
and on ISIS camps in eastern Syria. Now, the new government in Syria, whatever it is, has responsibility for everybody in Syria. So all those people. Now, the talk about ISIS people coming out of Syria and coming to Britain, yeah, that is a big concern. And that's something that we need to look at very closely. Luckily, although a lot of things in Britain don't work, our security services do. So I'm hopeful that they will make sure that at least we know who's coming and can deal with them. But the government itself, as long as we don't try and impose an Iraq settlement like we did in 2003 and don't let them let the Taliban go wild as we did 2 years ago, I think there is a chance. The West must support with advice and resources, but at the end of the day, this has got to be a Syrian and Arab solution.
Well, this is it. It's fascinating. But we watch, the UN, and we've got, our Foreign Secretary David Lammy and everyone else, and all having their tuppence worth, and good riddance to Assad, and watching and waiting, and want to have a democratic government. But there is no history of democracy in these countries. I was incredibly optimistic with the Arab Spring, incredibly optimistic about things being up to change as a result of Western involvement. I'm now a jaded old cynic that I'm not entirely sure that this is possible, and my concern now has become more, let's just make sure that things don't go so badly that it's now a threat to the West as well as to the poor godforsaken people of these countries.
Yeah, I mean, the key lesson is, though, that if you appease dictators, you get what you get. And we did that with Assad, and we've done that with Putin. But absolutely, I mean, it is a concern. But I think with the right support from the international community and involvement, then Syria has a chance. I mean, I know so many Syrians, and all the Syrians I know, admittedly, most of them are doctors and very sort of professional class.
Well, like all the people arriving on the migrant boats across the Channel, they're all doctors and rocket scientists, apparently, and engineers.
Well, I'm not sure they are, but certainly the diaspora in this country, and most of them want to return and help.
Well, that's part of the issue, isn't it? Because actually the people who are able to flee and come here, legally, many of them, those people able to flee, they were, the middle classes, the professional classes, people with skills, people who perhaps could actually play a really good role in nation building. And if you just leave it to the jihadists in Syria, you're likely to have a bigger problem.
Well, exactly. That's why it's so important that we do help them. All these experts get back. There was a Syrian government in exile for many years in Turkey. There are actually politicians who one sort of trusts, and we need to get back them in there to help. But what will happen if there is not support and things do fall apart? Then exactly as you suggest, we could go the same way as Iraq. We must try and ensure that the government still functions. They still need a health service. They still need roads to work. They still need water and electricity, which, of course, Assad has destroyed. So there's an awful lot that can be done. But and also we must make sure that those remaining chemical weapons are destroyed and don't fall into the wrong hands. Which I think the Israelis and others are trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
But you'll recall, obviously, what happened in Iraq and also what happened in Afghanistan. Again, it seems to be happening in Syria again. You get these rebel forces, all the Western military, right? The police and the army just literally take their uniforms off, put their weapons down, and they scarper. The prison guards at these awful, brutal, torturous, murderous prisons where political detainees have been held. They're just gone. They can't even gain access to some of these cells where they believe many thousands of men are still being kept. And the government disappears. We've seen the looting of palaces. Understandable sentiment from people having to live under those brutal regimes, and looting of the central bank. But this has a knock-on effect in terms of the utter breakdown of society. And when you have that breakdown of civil society, it's the men with guns and the most brutal men with guns who always win.
Yeah, I get that, but I think we need to give them a chance. I think everybody knows who these jailers are, or they know who these people are. Yeah. It would appear that they are trying to have some sort of security within Damascus and elsewhere, and this isn't happening across Syria. Yeah. Damascus is the focus, and when you've got the media all over the place, in some, that I wouldn't say encourages it, but that's what people are there for. So yeah, I think a lot of people are working very hard behind the scenes, and we do know how to mess it up. So hopefully we also know how to, give them a chance. And,
fingers crossed.
And a stable Syria is what everybody wants and needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got other problems like Putin and Ukraine that are much closer to us at the moment than perhaps Syria.
Yeah, a very good point. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, OBE, thank you so much for talking to us.